So I've laid my front out on top of my insert, my pillow insert, and your pillow insert, I would have given the measurements to begin with, but just to be sure it's 16 by 16 for this one. Now, if you finish off your weaving and you find that due to the yarn that you've used, due to using a different reed or whatever you've had to do, that yours is a bit smaller or a bit larger, you can easily make your own cushion insert by just sewing up a basic square of cloth, just any old cloth, and stuffing it yourself with some polyfill. I'm not sure what you call it in your country. It's you know, like a polyester fill type thing that they use inside these anyway. So yes, you can actually make it to size. Mine fits pretty well. It's I've got a little bit extra at the top, which is fine. That's what I planned for, to have a bit more so that I wasn't running short. And so I've just laid that over the insert, and so I can see that I'm going to have probably 2 extra inches at the top, so I know that I don't need to sew that. Make sure that you consider your seam allowances as well. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller. And now I'm going to put my backing on it as well. Now you're going to use the right side of your backing, so think about the back of your cushion. Is this the side of the weaving that you want to show? If it is, then you need to put it face down on this weaving so that the right sides are together. It doesn't matter too much for the back panel because your, you know, back or front, it looks pretty much the same, but for this panel you're going to need to make sure that it comes the right way out when you turn it out. So you definitely need to have those right sides facing together. And I'm just going to measure mine up a little bit to allow for that 2 inches at the top that I wanted to stay off. Yep, so that's about 18 inches there. Okay, so now I can take that out of the way and just pin these panels together. We're going to have to leave a gap, of course, for turning out, so don't forget to do that. It's up to you how many pins you put in. If you're a less confident sewer, you'll probably want more pins to make sure everything stays in place while you're sewing it. So it's up to you where you leave your gap for turning. I'm just going to leave mine on one side, I think. So I'll pin up to a certain point, and then I will think, well, how big do I want my gap for turning? About that big perhaps, which is 8 inches. So leave about an 8-inch gap for turning. And we're going to close that by hand afterwards. Now if you're more experienced with sewing and you're happy to you know, put in a zipper or do an envelope fold or some other way of putting it together so that the cover is removable, that's fine, you can go ahead and do that, but I'm keeping it simple for those who don't have so much experience with the sewing machine, so that you can just hand sew it closed at the end and you don't have to worry about doing any fancy closures. Okay, so I'm just going to remeasure. Yeah, I'll be putting my pins along about there. Remember I said I had that bit at the top that was more than I needed. I would always rather end up with more than I need than less. The stripes on this should help you to be able to sew if you find it hard to sew in a straight line. So we're all pinned together. We'll go over to the sewing machine. So just a regular length sewing stitch and a regular 1/4 inch seam at the edge. I'm starting at the bottom of one of my gaps. That's easier to do so that you don't forget about your gap and then sew over the gap. So I'm starting at this point and then I'll go all the way around back to the top of my gap. Don't forget to back stitch on the first few stitches to lock your stitches in. And go slowly. This is, you know, sort of bulky fabric, so you want to go nice and slow and take your time. Turn the corner. So to turn the corner, you leave the needle down in the fabric and it won't slip away from you. It's anchored there and you can keep going. Now it may look like I'm doing more of a 1/4 inch seam here, but my fabric underneath is actually a little bit shorter than the top fabric, so that's why I'm doing it that way. Pins out as you go. Needle down, fabric turned, pins out as you go. This table is not the one that I normally sew at, and it's not as strong as I thought, so if you see it jiggling about a bit, that's why. It's an old desk. Check your fabric every now and then, make sure your panels are still matching up and that things haven't moved underneath. Turning now. Now we've come back to the side where we are going to leave the gap. I'll just take out those extra pins. So we're just going to sew down to this pin, which is my marker for the gap. And back stitch at the end. We can cut the thread threads and we can turn it inside out and have a look. I've trimmed my corners and I've trimmed off any excess, and I've overlocked the edges that I've trimmed. I haven't needed to do any overlocking on these edges because they were the edges of the fabric, so they're not going to unravel. But if you're at all worried about unraveling, either overlock the edges or do a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. Okay, so now we can turn this inside out. And we are very close to finishing. A bit exciting, isn't it? So when you're turning a cushion inside out, you poke your fingers into the corners. Okay, do that for each corner. It just makes the corners stick out nicely, gives it a bit more of a professional finish. Last one. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've got here. There's the front of our cover and the back, looking good. So if you're happy with yours at this point, you can put your cushion insert in. So an easier way to do this is to actually fold it over in half and work it in that way. If you want to leave a bigger gap, that's fine. Just means you've got a little bit more hand sewing at the end, which isn't really a problem. Alright, we're nearly there. Once it's in, then we can unfold it and push it up into the corners where it belongs. Try and get the insert to fill the cover as much as possible. There we go. Now we're left with the gap, and as I said before, we don't need to worry about these edges unraveling because these are our selvages from the loom, but it's going to look much nicer if we turn them under anyway, like so. Just turn it under a little bit, just like these ones are already naturally turned under from the seam that you've done on the sewing machine. And we'll just go along and pin those together, those turned under edges. Keep turning those under. So we'll just take a regular sewing needle and just some black sewing thread. Right, when you're threading your needle, pull your thread through double, right through to so the two tails meet, and that gives you a bit of extra strength because you generally need it for closing gaps in seams and things like that. Okay, so just bring the two tails together and knot them there. Didn't do a very good job of that. That's better. Okay. Now, starting from one end, and it doesn't matter which end, but I'm going to start at this end so that I'm working along to the right. So we'll just have a look at that pin there and see where our gap starts. So the gap starts there, so I'm going to take the needle right in so that the knot from the thread is buried inside, and then I'm going to take one piece of this folded over edge like this and one piece of the honeycomb edge like this. One piece of this edge. This is kind of a ladder stitch. Hope that's clear enough. I know they're not the best colours to be demonstrating this with. And keep pinching the seam as you go along. So one through that side, one through this side. Okay, so we'll just keep going along the whole seam like that until the gap's closed. And when you get to the end of your gap, you just make a knot and you bury it in and cut off the tail. Another good thing about weaving with wool is it's really forgiving. You can't even see the stitches in there, so even if you don't do a particularly good job of it, it probably won't show. And guess what? We're finished! Yay!